Politicians spending more money than they actually have. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Certainly, financial mismanagement is a tale as old as the tradition of putting an X in a box on polling day. But when it comes to local government, well, there are alarming indications that the problems are endemic. Birmingham City Council is just the latest local authority to issue a Section 114 order, essentially to cry bankruptcy and to point to a shortfall in funding of hundreds of millions. Research shows that almost 1 in 10 councils in England fear they will have to do similarly in the next year. Councillors are meeting in Birmingham as we record this podcast to vote on huge cuts to services and an increase in council tax. Life there is about to change noticeably and significantly. We will be hearing about problems specific to Birmingham in just a moment, but pretty much every council is expected to bump their own council tax payments by the maximum of almost 5%. And that suggests something is badly wrong in the state of local government. I'm Niall Paterson. Welcome to the Sky News Daily. Later, we will be getting the bigger picture from one local government expert working for the new local think tank. But let's bring in our Midlands correspondent, Becky Cotterill. Becky, what exactly is happening?
So this full council meeting today is basically when everyone gets to vote through the proposed budget cuts. Birmingham has said that they want to try and save 300 million in the short term, and that is because they basically can't balance their books. They've effectively declared bankruptcy. They've said what they want the cuts to be. Essentially, it means social services, both for adults and children, are very vulnerable. Today is when the full council basically approves those cuts, and after that it will be the people of this city and the services that are going to be hit by them.
How on earth does England's second city go bust? How does somewhere like Birmingham run out of cash, for goodness sakes?
Birmingham City Council would say, look, we are faced with the same problems that face councils up and down the country, rising inflation, a reduction in government grants since the era of austerity. But there is more going on here. There's been a lot of controversy around an equal pay dispute. Essentially, female council workers, so women doing jobs like cleaning, dinner ladies, versus male council workers, which jobs like bin collectors have tended to be male. The women saying, look, we're either not receiving the same bonuses as men on similar pay grades, or we're doing more work for the same amount of money. Now, the council has already paid out around £1 billion to those female workers. It's now thought they could be liable for about another £1 billion. But there's also been problems with the implementation of a new IT system. It was meant to cost, I think, around 20 million. It's been more like 100 million sorting that out. So there are individual circumstances that are making the problems more acute here. But certainly, like other councils who have been declaring these Section 114 notices, effectively declaring bankruptcy, there are issues, and it's only got worse since austerity. But I think it would be unwise for Birmingham to try and claim that they are no different to other councils.
You've just mentioned it there, the Section 114 notice. What are the consequences of a local authority issuing one of those, beyond the fact that it is a pretty obvious statement that we are bankrupt, we've run out of money?
So essentially what it means is that the council has to stop new money, new spending on non-essential services. But I think that's quite misleading. It almost sounds less severe than it actually is, because non-essential spending can include youth services. It can include support for vulnerable families dealing with alcohol addiction. Now, by law, the council will continue to provide certain services such as social care and bin collections, but social care will face cuts, so people won't necessarily be getting the same quality of service, and bin collections are set to become fortnightly. They're also expected to start dimming the street lights and to reduce spending on highway maintenance. So non-essential might sound like, well, you're still going to get the things that matter, but that is not the case. There are plenty of people who are and should be worried about the services that will be cut.
Let's just briefly pick up on that point, Becky, with one lifelong Brummie. Shuranjeet Singh was born, raised and still lives in Handsworth. He serves as governor of a couple of local schools. But Shuranjeet, it's the local library we want to start with. Tell me about it.
If you close your eyes and you're imagining you're walking down Soho Road, which is an incredibly busy high street, there are communities, cultures and cuisines from around the world peppered across the Soho Road, smells from various places, communities who have come together to build businesses, to build their hubs. And all of a sudden you walk across this very, very large, Victorian, towering building with images of Matthew Boulton, James Watt, and the Industrial Revolution etched into the stone. You look up and you see Handsworth Library, and it is several steps up, so you have to walk up slightly to the library. It's elevated compared with the rest of the road, and as you walk in, you see the beautiful tiling on the floor. You see the stained glass in the walls, and you also see smiling library staff members who are there to help, there to support, and there to ensure that members of our communities can get the support they need around education, technology, health, and even just coming together to have a tea and a biscuit. And every single time I've walked into the library, it has been a moment of feeling warm, both on the inside and also recognizing that actually the library serves as a warm space in the time where many are finding it harder and harder to pay for their fuel bills. And so really, Handsworth Library is iconic. It is both visually just an amazing and a beautiful building. And the function it serves in the local community cannot be understated. And even if many people in the local community, only rarely access the library, there are many people who use it every day. There are people for whom it is a lifeline. And there are people for whom their lives would be completely different if that library ceased to operate.
Thank you, Shuranjeet. Let's return to Becky Cotterill. If you do not access the services that you've been describing provided by a local authority, you don't miss them when they've gone. So give us a flavour of where we are going to see some pretty significant shifts in provision of services and indeed provision of cash.
The biggest area that the council is going to cut is children's services. 51 million they're going to have to cut. Now, they're saying that that won't mean that you won't still get social workers going out to visit families, but what it will mean is the kind of wraparound care it's often referred to is potentially going to go. Those services are all vulnerable. So I went to speak to a special educational needs nursery who are concerned about all of this. They are not vulnerable themselves because they get most of their funding from the NHS, but they were saying that they've already noticed that the services they refer families to, those ones I was just mentioning, there has been a decline because of rising inflation, cost-cutting measures, and they are really concerned that they are going to have nowhere to direct the families that they help, but also that the children that turn up at their nursery are going to be in a much worse state because they haven't had that early years care that is so crucial.
Another area in which if you haven't accessed those services, you might not miss them when they go. You've also visited a domestic violence refuge.
They are terrified that they are going to lose their funding. 80% of their funding comes from the council. Their contract with them is up for renewal this year. And, they said to me, we're only a drop in the ocean. I think it's 19 beds they offer. But they were pointing out that if you want to take a cold-hearted view of this, it's not just the fact that they are saving women from really dire services. It's the fact that they're also saving money in the long term, because if someone is able to go there instead of going into, say, a mental health facility, which a lot of these women have or will end up going to, you're saving money because they can provide the services cheaper that stop the women from getting to the point where they need to go and seek psychiatric help.
Look, across England, as I understand it, we will see pretty much every council raising council tax by the maximum that they're allowed, almost 5%. Birmingham, others have been given permission to go up to 10%. In a city the size of Birmingham, is an increase of 10% on council tax not enough to deal with all the problems that we've just been discussing?
It's kind of increasing council tax in the hope that they're going to be able to balance their books and pay back some of the money that they owe as part of this equal pay dispute, as well as other things. I've been speaking to people in Birmingham. They say it just feels like the working man or woman is being hit harder and harder. It's 10% over the first year, 10% over the second year. So just over 20% it will work out over 2 years. That's a lot that people are going to have to fork out.
Have any of those who represent Birmingham in terms of local government, have any of them expressed any contrition for this? Because ultimately, if you're searching for £300 million down the back of the sofa, I'm going to gently suggest that the councillors got stuff wrong.
The leader of Birmingham Council is pointing to the fact that they've faced lower grants from central government, the fact that inflation is rising and that the problems here are not unique. But I don't think that washes with the people of Birmingham, certainly not the people that I'm speaking to. I think at the start, especially when the cost of living started to bite, people were willing to give the local authorities a bit of leeway. But now, when the people of Birmingham are faced with the cold hard facts of the cuts, looking at how much their council tax is going to go up by, they're not willing to buy that this is a national problem. They feel, a lot of them, that the council has really mismanaged things.
I suppose the one bit of evidence that we could show that suggests that this is not necessarily a problem limited to Birmingham is the fact that, we have seen 6 local councils, going bust since 2021, that we do know that more than 50% of them fear that they will be going bankrupt in the next Parliament.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad we're doing this podcast today because I don't think that it's been covered enough. The local government associations say that in terms of kind of real terms cuts, councils have 27% less in terms of core spending since the era of austerity, since 2010. And that has been attributed to a variety of things. But the fact that we've got so many more councils effectively going bust in the past few years compared to the past, say, 30 years, clearly there is a massive problem now.
Becky, thank you. We will be back in a few moments looking at the state of local government elsewhere in England. Now, as we have already noted, Birmingham City Council is certainly not alone in facing huge budgetary pressures. Even without needing to declare bankruptcy, across the country, local authorities have, for the best part of a decade and a half, had to make painful cuts. Cuts which are, well, pretty much only noticed by the people accessing those specific services. Jessica Studdert is the Deputy Chief Executive of the new local think tank. She's also advised the Labour Party on local government. Jessica, good to see you. Look, let's start with Birmingham. What do you make of what's happening there?
Birmingham's got quite a unique set of circumstances. There's obviously been a few particular challenges, like there's been an equal pay claim from some of the workforce. But Birmingham as a city faces enormous challenges. There's about 40% of kids in Birmingham live in poverty. So there's enormous demand on the types of services that Birmingham City Council and all councils provide. As
we've actually already kind of investigated on this podcast, it is a set of financial straitenings, a set of financial circumstances that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that pretty much every council in England is facing at the moment.
I think there's 3 big things that are important to consider that's going on as the context for a lot of this that councils are grappling with. The first thing is that they've had their funding cut in real terms since 2010. Broadly speaking, councils have got 20% less funding to play with. They've also, like many of us, facing the challenges of rising inflation. So there's rising costs. So they have to sort of run to standstill, both rising costs in terms of delivering services. And then there are some big sort of wider societal trends that really have consequences for the types of services that councils deliver. So one thing is we're all living longer. So more of us have social care needs, more of us are living longer with more support needs. But then there are other things like poverty, rising levels of inequality, and the cost of living crisis that means that services like homelessness support or support for children in need and vulnerable families, there's a whole range of things that councils provide that have rising demand pressures due to factors beyond councils' control. And that's before I've even mentioned grappling with the pandemic. I mean, most councils have gone from a kind of crisis response on the pandemic straight through to a cost of living crisis footing where they're going to have warm spaces and food hubs for people. So the new normal for councils is a highly volatile operating environment.
It certainly sounds like it. Did no one in central government notice what was happening to local government?
It's a good point. It's been under the radar for a few years. It's been growing as a challenge, and certainly you look at isolated issues like social care. Funding for social care has been long kicked into the long grass by national government that refusing to really look seriously about the fact that it's not funded anywhere near to the levels of demand that the care services are facing. But I mean, the top line is it's quite easy for government to ignore the cost pressures and the demand pressures on local government.
Clearly, there has been financial mismanagement at some of the councils that have been affected. I think immediately of Croydon and indeed in Birmingham. So I do wonder, are councillors the right people to run councils, elected in small turnout elections, in small wards with small numbers of people even entitled to vote in the first place. They don't necessarily have any financial experience.
I think it's very easy to point to a couple of examples of councils failing and tar all local government with the same brush. I think similarly it's very easy to point to national government failures and huge amounts of money wasted on government contracts or outsourcing. I think there is a real benefit to local government being empowered. People who are councillors live in the area, they understand the area, they're residents by definition. So I think by the same token, there's a huge amount of mistrust of decisions made from on high in Westminster that don't meet the mark. But I think that's what's different about the scenario we find ourselves in now, that it's a systemic problem. It's not isolated examples anymore.
I'm just looking at some of the data here. Pest control budgets down by 2/3 in real terms. Trading standard budgets cut by 50%. Street cleaning by more than a fifth. Waste disposal and collection budgets per person squeezed by 11%. I'm just wondering, given the utility of all of those services and the fact that people will have noticed that they have gone or have been diminished, where is the public anger? Do people understand what local authorities do, where the money goes to and what they actually spend it on?
It's a great list you've got there, and I think it's fair to say that as soon as you walk out the door of your house into your neighbourhood, local authorities are responsible for so much of what you see: parks, playgrounds, youth services, everything that makes a good community and it makes communities thrive. I think one of the challenges is that council funding is a really complex area, and everyone thinks, well, we pay our council tax, so why am I not getting my the services that I expect? Whereas actually council tax is a small proportion of the overall funding for local government, and a lot of it comes from national government. So in the way that income tax that we pay, VAT, other national insurance, other taxes all go straight to the Chancellor, there's only a small bit goes back to local government. Councils aren't able to raise their own revenue. In other countries, it's quite normal for a proportion of income tax that we generate to be retained locally and spent locally in different areas. Our taxation system is highly centralised. All eyes looking to the budget tomorrow. There's an enormous amount of power vested in the Chancellor to make these decisions, when actually local decisions and local areas would know what's best to a large extent.
And I suppose when you strip it all away, when you strip away the kind of the arguments about central government and their funding, all the rest of it, there is one simple truth at the heart of all of this, which is that when you make cuts to local government spending, that disproportionately affects the worst off in that community.
It does. It hits the vulnerable, more hidden communities the hardest. It hits people who are facing homelessness, children in need, highly vulnerable children in families that need support, and people with social care needs. I think the other thing to say, though, is that this isn't the cheaper option. We see high demand pressures on hospitals. We see police picking up the consequences of things. We'll see other services have to step in and pick up the cost consequences for councils paring back a lot of their provision. If you were to fund local areas properly, there would be much more sort of sustainability overall, and I think people would see the benefit of it.
Jessica, thank you. It's very easy to be dismissive of the role of local government, simply because so much of what it does exists beneath the surface of bin collections and potholes. Yet the services our councils provide are essential for those that lose them. There will be plenty of people grumbling about the, well, admittedly significant rises to council tax that pretty much all of us will have to shoulder. But those already disadvantaged are those who will be hit hardest by the cuts that Birmingham is instituting, and other councils are certain to follow. That's your lot for this edition of the Sky News Daily. We'll see you next time.